everything pearl related, from the history of pearls, cultured pearls, the difference between salt and freshwater pearls, how to identify fake. So kind of like a very global everything you need to know about pearls. If you are new to this channel, hit the subscribe and smash that like button if you want to see more jewelry content. Alright, so the very first thing is pearls. Where do they come from? So basically pearls are actually coming from oysters or clams. For example, oysters, they're actually like filtration systems kind of. They basically eat from whatever the content is in the water. If you look really closely to like the rim of the shell, they actually have these kind of like little tiny little alien looking leg called cilia. And the cilia basically pushes the water into the clam and it filters all of the algae and other things, and that is actually what they eat. What ends up happening and why pearls are created is basically when they sweep something in that shouldn't be in. So it can be pieces of shell, it can be little parasites, anything like that, that basically ends up into the shell and causes an irritant. What the oyster will actually do in order to kind of like protect itself from the irritant is it's actually going to secrete this kind of really gooey substance called nacre. Over time, the nacre basically solidifies over the object and it grows, and so it becomes more and more and more and more, and it eventually forms the pearl. And those are where pearls come from. Today we have cultured pearls, which we will go into a minute, but that is how the natural formation of pearls occur. It is interesting because pearls are the only, not the only, there's also coral, there's like ivory, bones, things like that, but one of the only organic matter in terms of like gemstones in the jewelry industry, right? It's coming from an organism versus like gemstones are coming from like minerals over time. The formation of natural pearls is actually quite like rare. So before cultured pearls became introduced into like the common market, natural pearls, so non-cultured, were very hard to find. You could, through tons of clams, only find maybe 2 to 3 decent quality pearls. And it was also very dangerous. So prior to like the 1900s and even within the 1900s, the equipment that people had to use to basically attain these pearls was like barbaric. They basically had no equipment. Throughout history, they actually did what we called free diving, and that was literally exactly what it sounded like. People would throw themselves into the water and swim down and try to collect clams. Sometimes they would do things like they would tie themselves to rocks to be able to save energy in going down. They would have weave-in baskets to be able to collect it. In Asia, they were said to have covered themselves in grease to protect themselves from the cold because grease keeps the heat in. They didn't have the technologies at the time, and so a lot of the times it was very slave-powered. A lot of these times were still like, you know, 200, 300 years ago, and so unfortunately, it was reserved to slave work in a lot of the cases. Very dangerous. A lot of people had a lot of negative health problems from it. There's a lot of drowning. There was a lot of attacks from sharks, for example. So it was very, very hard work. Even with all of this effort put into it, the discovery of natural pearls was so scarce that they were very highly praised, and then a lot of the times they were actually reserved solely to nobility. So if you were, for example, a common dweller or whatever, and you were found with a pearl, you could actually be executed. But the interesting thing about pearls is that it wasn't even just the pearls that were sought after, because the whole organism in itself was actually used, which is actually kind of cool. It's not like the really sad killing of elephants for their tusks and just like taking the ivory. Like when these pearls are taken, it's not just the pearls. So when a pearl is taken, it will also be the meat is sold, and then the nacre. So if you actually open up like a shell and you look inside, that's going to be that pretty, very kind of like lustrous, multicolored, shiny shell. That's called nacre, and that's the same thing that's secreted within to create the pearl. And so those are actually used for a lot of times in like jewelry, buttons, musical instrument like the keys. So it was kind of like really good in the sense that they were reused for many purposes and not just taking the pearls and killing them. So this was kind of like pre-cultured pearls. So cultured pearls really came around in 1893 when Kokishi Mikimoto pioneered them, because there was always the theory that you could basically mimic the reproduction of pearls, but it was never successfully done. And so he was really the one who discovered and experimented a lot in order to create like the perfect pearl, like the Kyoto pearl that we have today, the perfectly round one. Essentially what he had done was he had discovered that basically in taking a graft of flesh, so he would open up what we would call a donor clam, and he would basically extract a tiny little piece of flesh from the donor and insert it into the new clam along with a nucleus, which we'll touch in a second. And that was found to be able to reproduce the new perfect pearl. And so there was a lot of experimentation. First of all, the nucleus that was inserted along with the flesh, it was kind of like a bead, okay? And the bead at first was made through many different things. They tried wood, they tried glass, but eventually they found that the best solution was actually nacre. And so they would take the nacre from an existing clam, they would file it down into a bead, and that's what they would insert with the flesh. And then the nacre caused by being irritated would then form around the bead like a natural pearl. And this was one of the first times that they were actually able to get like perfectly round pearls, because before that, pearls naturally in the wild, like it can grow in many different forms, right? Another technique, if they don't want the perfectly round, like a koyo pearl for example, then they will actually just take the graft of flesh, and that's when the nacre will totally dissolve the flesh and take on different forms. So that's when you'll find more like Baroque shapes, rice shapes, etc. That's because it doesn't have a perfectly formed nucleus in the middle. So they've made it up to a point in cultured farming that a lot of times, I think it's something like 80% of the nucleuses will not be rejected, which is excellent. So it's come to a point where we've been able to really master the art of culturing pearls. Another fun thing is that they're also able to reuse the oysters many times. The production of a pearl generally can be anywhere between like the lower quality ones and like the smaller ones, right? Because the smaller it is because it didn't have as much time to grow. It can be as little as like 6 months, but then it can go all the way up to 2 to 4 years for the much bigger pearls. Obviously, the bigger the pearl, the more time it took, and so the more expensive it's going to be. But one of the fun things now today is that they're also able to reuse the same oysters many times. So the person who's able to insert the graft and insert the nucleus inside of the pearl, when extracting the previous pearl, if the pearl is still in good condition and it's of good quality, then they will deem it okay to reinsert a new pearl and start the 2-year process again. Versus like sometimes if the pearl that is extracted isn't of good quality, then unfortunately they will not continue the system. Oysters today can be used, I guess, 2 to 5 times. So it's pretty good. And then afterwards, obviously, like I said earlier, they will sell the flesh and they will sell the nacre out. So like the main difference between freshwater and saltwater, because you can find pearls all over the world, Japan, Australia, China, in the US, you can find pearls like almost everywhere. They can be in saltwater, freshwater. I think the main differences between freshwater and saltwater is that saltwater, they only really carry 1 to 2 pearls maximum generally within an oyster, and versus you have freshwater pearls which can hold up to like 30. The production is just not the same. However, generally freshwater pearls tend to not be as nice, tend to not be as good quality. Generally they tend to have shorter like lifespans, so instead of growing for like 2 years, I'll probably grow them for, let's say, 6 months. So it's not the same production quality. So when you're looking at identifying a synthetic pearl versus a real pearl, one of the things that they do at GIA, which is really cool, is they actually x-ray them. And so if they are natural pearls, then you'll see kind of like an onion formation. So because it's naturally grown, you'll be able to very clearly see from the center of the pearl kind of like these kind of like rings that look like onions, and that is to show that the nacre has grown naturally. Versus if you have like a cultured pearl with a nucleus, you will be able to see the nucleus in the x-ray and then much smaller like onion rings essentially. So that is like the very first way. Obviously if you're buying like smaller pearls, I don't know if it's necessarily worth it to have them GIA certified, but a few ways is to actually rub them together ever so slightly, because the natural pearls, because of this formation, will not have a very, like, they'll be smooth to the eye, but they won't have, like, on a microscopic level, a perfectly smooth surface. And so by rubbing them slightly together, you will feel a slight friction, versus if it's a synthetic pearl, it's going to just be like smooth like butter. It's going to have like a glossy finishing that's like a coating added to the pearl, so you'll be able to feel it. Another thing is that a natural pearl will be quite light, versus something that has a nucleus. It's going to be a lot heavier. So some of the most expensive pearls that you can find are called South Sea pearls. They grow on the coast of Australia. You can find them in the Philippines. So these are one of the rarer pearls. They come from an oyster called Pinctada maxima, and they require very, very clean water. And so they're a little bit more finicky, and they also have a very long gestation period. So it's generally between 3 to 10 years in order to grow a pearl. So that is why they are some of the most expensive pearls. A strand can range from anywhere from 10,000 all the way up to 100,000 for a strand. However, they have a very beautiful luster. They have a very clean shine. So if you're lucky to have one, they are very beautiful. They are also some of the largest. Because they have such a long growing period, you can have pearls from anywhere to 10 to 15 millimeters. Then we have Tahitian pearls. They are generally between 8 to 14 millimeters. They come from a type of oyster called black lip oyster. As you can see, even when you open the nacre will actually be of a darker hue, which is why the pearls tend to be grays, dark greens, like silvery blues, and they can range between 5,000 to 25,000 for a strand of pearls. And lastly, for the more commercially available, we have the Akoya pearls. So those are usually between 6 to 9 millimeters. So these pearls are very easy to match because they have very little variation. They're also always perfectly round. They grow from a period of 18 months to 2 years. So it's relatively a short growth period time. And you can get a strand of pearls from anywhere between 3,000 to 10,000. To understand basically the difference in prices between natural pearls and cultured pearls are still considered natural, okay? And the reason why is because there is still a natural growth process. It's just that they have been kind of like helped along by having an irritant inserted into the oyster. However, natural pearls that have naturally occurred in by itself, it's so very rare. Like, you can have tons of pearls to be able to find tons of oysters, clams to be able to find a single pearl, and to even up that by finding one of good quality is extremely, extremely rare. This is why some of the most famous pearls are natural pearls, and they have exuberant prices. For example, the Hope pearl, which was said to have weighed over 450 carats. It's believed to be the biggest natural saltwater pearl ever discovered, and it measures 2 inches by 4 inches, which is humongous. We also have the Peregrina pearl, which translates directly into the Wanderer. It was originally discovered in Panama near the 1500s, and it was given to King Philip II, who then later gave it to his wife, Queen Mary. It weighed a total of 56 carats. After the Queen had died, it had eventually found its way to the hands of Napoleon. Later on in the 1960s, Richard Burton had bought it for Elizabeth Taylor as a Valentine's Day gift. If I could receive that as a Valentine's Day gift, hell yeah, are you kidding me? So get ready for this. It has recently been resold for a whopping $11 million. So as you can see, natural pearls are worth significantly more than if that would have been a cultural pearl. It's also very cool because of the transition of history. Whoever owns it now knows that Napoleon had once owned it, so that is like, to me, super cool. Alright, so now we've wrapped that segment up. The last little part we're going to touch on is going to be the care for your pearls. Pearls are a organic matter, and so they can be damaged over time when in contact with chemicals. Let that be like Purell. If you have a pearl ring and you're putting Purell on your hands, it's going to really damage the pearl. If you're wearing a pearl necklace and you put perfume on, try to avoid putting on your neck and maybe on your wrists instead. When you put hairspray, maybe lift it up and wipe your neck down before putting your pearl necklace, because these are things that will really damage your pearls over time. And once they're damaged, it's not like a gemstone that you can just like repolish. It doesn't work that way. So you really want to make sure that you have a good maintenance routine for your pearls. Yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'd also love to know if you guys personally love pearls, which are your favorite types of pearls, and we'll see you next time.